The morning sun found Marcus standing at the edge of his village, his father's sword at his side and a small pack containing his few possessions slung over his shoulder. The decision had come to him during the darkest hours before dawn, not as a sudden revelation but as a quiet certainty that had grown stronger with each passing moment. He would accept Captain Aldrich's offer and begin the journey toward becoming a royal guard. His parents stood beside him, their faces showing the complex mixture of pride and sorrow that comes when a child steps into adulthood. His father pressed a small leather pouch into his hands, containing the few coins the family had managed to save over the years. His mother embraced him one final time, whispering prayers for his safety and success in a voice thick with emotion. Master Willem had arrived before sunrise, unwilling to let his most promising student depart without a proper farewell. The old instructor's weathered hands shook slightly as he placed them on Marcus's shoulders, offering final words of advice and encouragement. He spoke of staying true to the principles they had practiced together, of never letting success corrupt the humility that had brought him this far. Captain Aldrich waited patiently as Marcus said his goodbyes, understanding the importance of this moment for the young man and his family. The captain had made similar departures in his own youth, leaving behind everything familiar to pursue a calling that demanded total dedication. He recognized the courage it took to embrace such uncertainty, especially at Marcus's age. As they began the journey toward the capital, Captain Aldrich shared stories of what Marcus could expect in the months ahead. The Royal Guard's training program was designed to push recruits beyond their perceived limitations, both physically and mentally. Many would-be guards discovered that their dreams of glory were quickly replaced by the harsh realities of endless drilling, strict discipline, and constant evaluation. The training facility itself was a marvel of military architecture, built to house and educate the kingdom's most elite warriors. Its walls contained armories filled with the finest weapons, libraries holding centuries of tactical knowledge, and training grounds that could simulate virtually any combat situation. Marcus would have access to resources that most fighters could only dream of, but he would also face expectations that few could meet. During their 3-day journey, Captain Aldrich took the opportunity to begin Marcus's education in earnest. He corrected flaws in the young man's technique that had gone unnoticed at the academy, introduced concepts of strategy and battlefield awareness that extended far beyond individual combat skills, and began to shape Marcus's understanding of what it truly meant to serve as a royal guard. The conversations revealed aspects of military life that Marcus had never considered. Royal guards were not simply skilled fighters. They were diplomats, investigators, and leaders who might be called upon to handle any crisis that threatened the kingdom's stability. Their training encompassed everything from courtly etiquette to interrogation techniques, from siege warfare to personal protection duties. As they crested the final hill before reaching the capital, Marcus caught his first glimpse of the city that would become his new home. The Royal Guard facility stood prominently on a hill overlooking the sprawling metropolis, its banners flying proudly in the afternoon breeze. The sight filled Marcus with a mixture of excitement and apprehension as he contemplated the challenges that awaited him behind those imposing walls. Their arrival at the facility created a stir among the current recruits and instructors. Word of Marcus's performance against Captain Aldrich had preceded them, and the young man found himself the subject of intense scrutiny from his new peers. Some viewed him with curiosity and respect, while others seemed skeptical that someone so young and inexperienced could truly belong among their ranks. The introduction process was both formal and intimidating. Marcus was presented to the commandant of the facility, a stern woman whose reputation for producing exceptional royal guards was matched only by her intolerance for weakness or failure. Commander Thorne examined Marcus with calculating eyes, clearly weighing whether Captain Aldrich's faith in the young recruit was justified. The first few weeks of training proved to be the most challenging period of Marcus's life. The physical demands were unlike anything he had experienced, with training sessions that began before dawn and continued well into the evening. His fellow recruits, most of whom were several years older and had significantly more experience, initially treated him with a mixture of resentment and dismissal, But Marcus's natural abilities, combined with his unwavering determination to prove himself worthy of the opportunity he had been given, gradually began to win over both instructors and peers. His willingness to help struggling classmates, his refusal to quit despite obvious exhaustion, and his consistent improvement in all areas of training slowly earned the respect of those around him. The breakthrough came during a particularly demanding exercise designed to test the recruit's ability to work as a team under extreme pressure. Marcus found himself paired with some of the program's most experienced candidates, tasked with completing a series of challenges that required both individual skill and coordinated effort. His performance in this exercise demonstrated not only his combat abilities but also his potential as a leader and teammate. Captain Aldrich observed many of these training sessions, taking quiet satisfaction in watching Marcus develop into the warrior he had seen glimpses of during their original encounter. The captain had staked his reputation on this unconventional recruitment, and each sign of the young man's progress validated his decision to take such an unprecedented risk. As months passed, Marcus's transformation became evident to everyone who knew him. The uncertain teenager who had challenged a Royal Guard captain had evolved into a confident young warrior whose skills continued to grow with each passing day. He had not only survived the rigorous training program, but had begun to excel in ways that surprised even his most supportive instructors. The final test came near the end of his first year of training, when Marcus was required to face a series of challenges designed to evaluate every aspect of his development. Combat skills, tactical thinking, leadership ability, and moral character were all put to the test in scenarios that pushed him to his absolute limits. When the evaluation was complete and the results tallied, Marcus had achieved something remarkable. He had earned the right to continue his training toward full Royal Guard status, becoming the youngest person in the kingdom's history to reach this milestone. The blacksmith's son, who had once dreamed of serving something greater than himself, had taken the first crucial steps toward making that dream a reality. Standing in the courtyard where he had first arrived as an uncertain recruit, Marcus looked back on the journey that had brought him to this point. From a dusty academy training ground to the prestigious halls of the Royal Guard facility, he had traveled farther than he had ever imagined possible. But he also understood that this was not an ending but a beginning, the first chapter in what he hoped would be a long and honorable career in service to his kingdom. The rookie fighter who had once challenged a Royal Guard captain had become something far greater, a young man who had proven that courage, determination, and natural talent could indeed overcome seemingly impossible odds, opening doors to a future filled with endless possibilities. Dawn broke over the kingdom with an unusual buzz of excitement that seemed to permeate every street corner and market square. News of Marcus's extraordinary performance had spread like wildfire through the night, carried by excited witnesses and growing more dramatic with each telling. By the time the young fighter arrived at the academy for his morning training session, he found himself at the center of attention unlike anything he had ever experienced. The academy grounds were packed with visitors who had come specifically to catch a glimpse of the rookie who had supposedly defeated a Royal Guard captain. Merchants had abandoned their stalls, nobles had left their comfortable estates, and even farmers had traveled from distant villages, all drawn by the incredible story that had captured the kingdom's imagination. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sea of faces, all staring at him with expressions ranging from awe to skepticism. Master Willem took one look at the chaos surrounding his academy and made an immediate decision. He called Marcus aside and led him to a private training area behind the main building, away from the prying eyes and endless questions of the crowd. The old instructor's face was etched with concern as he explained the precarious situation his student now found himself in. The attention, while flattering, carried serious dangers that Marcus had not yet fully grasped. Already, challenges were arriving from fighters throughout the kingdom who wanted to test themselves against the young man who had supposedly bested Captain Aldrich. Some came seeking glory by defeating the famous rookie, while others genuinely wanted to measure their skills against such rumored talent. Either way, Marcus found himself the target of warriors far more experienced and dangerous than he was prepared to face. Among the crowd of would-be challengers was Sir Garrett, a former Royal Guard who had been dismissed from service 5 years earlier for excessive brutality. His reputation for inflicting serious injuries on opponents had made him unwelcome at most reputable training facilities. but tales of Marcus's achievement had drawn him out of the shadows. Sir Garrett's presence at the academy sent whispers of unease through the crowd, as many recognized the scarred warrior and knew his violent reputation. Captain Aldrich, who had remained at the academy overnight to complete his recruitment mission, observed the growing chaos with increasing concern. He had witnessed Marcus's remarkable performance firsthand, but he also understood that the young man's actual skill level, while impressive, was not yet sufficient to handle the caliber of opponents now seeking him out. The captain found himself in the unusual position of feeling responsible for the safety of someone he had fought just the day before. The situation reached a critical point when Sir Garrett publicly demanded a match with Marcus, his voice carrying across the training ground. With threatening authority, the dismissed Royal Guard made no attempt to hide his contempt for what he saw as an overrated novice who had gotten lucky against a captain who was holding back. His words were carefully chosen to provoke, designed to make it impossible for Marcus to decline without appearing cowardly. Master Willem immediately stepped forward to refuse the challenge on behalf of his student, but Marcus surprised everyone by gently placing a hand on his instructor's arm. The young man had spent the night thinking about Captain Aldrich's warnings, and he understood that running from challenges would only delay an inevitable confrontation. If he was to survive in this new world his performance had thrust him into, he would need to prove himself again and again. But Captain Aldrich had other ideas. The Royal Guard captain stepped between Sir Garrett and Marcus, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone present. His voice carried the absolute authority of his position as he declared that any challenges to Marcus would need to go through him first. The captain's steel-gray eyes locked onto Sir Garrett's, and the message was unmistakably clear. Anyone wanting to fight the rookie would first have to defeat the man who had trained him. The confrontation between the two former comrades was electric with tension. Sir Garrett's dismissal from the Royal Guard had been personally overseen by Captain Aldrich, creating a personal grudge that had festered for years. Now, face to face once again, both men understood that this meeting had been inevitable. The crowd sensed the dangerous undercurrents flowing between the two seasoned warriors and instinctively backed away. Sir Garrett accepted the captain's challenge with a smile that held no warmth, his hand moving to rest on the pommel of his sword. He had been waiting 5 years for an opportunity to prove that his dismissal had been unjust, that his methods, while harsh, had been effective. This public confrontation offered him the chance for revenge he had long dreamed of. The fight between Captain Aldrich and Sir Garrett was everything that Marcus's had not been. Where the previous day's contest had been marked by mutual respect and restraint, this battle was fueled by years of accumulated hatred and resentment. Both men fought with deadly serious intent, their blades ringing out with the harsh sound of steel meeting steel with full force. Sir Garrett proved that his dismissal from the Royal Guard had not dulled his skills. His attacks were vicious and relentless, each strike designed to cause maximum damage. He showed none of the control or precision that had marked Captain Aldrich's fight with Marcus, instead relying on raw aggression and a willingness to inflict serious harm on his opponent. But Captain Aldrich was still at the peak of his abilities, and 5 years of continuous service had only sharpened his already formidable skills. He met Sir Garrett's fury with calculated precision, turning the dismissed guard's aggression against him. Where Sir Garrett sought to overpower, Aldrich deflected and countered. Where Sir Garrett raged, Aldrich remained calm and focused. Marcus watched the brutal contest with growing understanding of just how much restraint Captain Aldrich had shown during their own encounter. The captain's movements now carried lethal intent, each strike thrown with the full weight of his skill and experience. This was what facing a truly motivated Royal Guard looked like, and Marcus realized how fortunate he had been to face the captain under controlled circumstances. The end came suddenly and decisively. Sir Garrett, consumed by his fury and frustration, overextended himself in a desperate attempt to land a killing blow. Captain Aldrich sidestepped the attack with minimal effort and brought the pommel of his sword down on the back of Sir Garrett's neck. The dismissed guard collapsed to the ground, unconscious before he hit the dirt. As Sir Garrett was carried away by his supporters, Captain Aldrich addressed the crowd with a voice that carried to every corner of the training ground. He made it clear that Marcus was under the protection of the Royal Guard and that any future challenges would need to be approved through proper channels. The captain's words effectively ended the immediate threat to the young fighter's safety, but they also served notice that Marcus's life had changed irrevocably. The crowd began to disperse, many disappointed that they would not see another spectacular fight, but all impressed by the display of skill they had witnessed between the two seasoned warriors. The message had been delivered clearly. Marcus was not an easy target to be bullied or exploited by those seeking quick fame or revenge. In the quiet that followed, Captain Aldrich made an announcement that surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. The Royal Guard was extending an unprecedented offer to the young fighter, immediate acceptance into their training program, despite his age and limited experience. This was an honor that had never been granted to anyone so young, a recognition of the extraordinary potential the captain had witnessed. But the offer came with conditions that gave Marcus pause. He would need to leave his family and his home immediately, relocating to the capital where the Royal Guard maintained their primary training facility. His education would be intense and demanding, with no guarantee of success. Many recruits, even those with years of experience, failed to complete the program. For someone with Marcus's limited background, the challenges would be even greater. Master Willem watched his student grapple with this life-changing decision, understanding the weight of the choice before him. The old instructor had devoted years to training Marcus, and seeing him succeed brought immense pride. But he also knew that accepting this offer would mean losing the young man who had become like a son to him. Marcus asked for time to consider the offer, and Captain Aldrich agreed to wait until the following morning for an answer. The captain understood that this decision would shape the rest of the young man's life, and such choices should not be made hastily or under pressure. That evening, Marcus sat with his parents in their modest home, discussing the opportunity that had presented itself so unexpectedly. His father, the blacksmith, struggled with conflicting emotions. He was proud beyond words of his son's achievement, but the thought of Marcus leaving for the dangerous life of a royal guard filled him with dread. His mother wept quietly, understanding that her boy was growing into a man whose destiny lay far beyond their simple village. The conversation continued late into the night, with each family member sharing their fears and hopes for Marcus's future. They all knew that this opportunity might never come again, that refusing could mean a lifetime of wondering what might have. The 12th minute brought with it a moment that would be etched into the memory of every person present. As Captain Aldrich launched into his most devastating combination attack, a series of strikes that had never failed to end a battle, Marcus did something that defied all logic and expectation. Instead of defending against the overwhelming assault, he stepped directly into it, accepting a glancing blow to his shoulder in order to create the opening he needed. The crowd gasped in unison as Marcus's sword found its mark, the tip coming to rest against Captain Aldrich's throat just below the edge of his helmet. For a heartbeat that seemed to last an eternity, both fighters froze in place. The captain's own blade was positioned to deliver what would have been a killing blow, stopped only by the mutual agreement that this was a demonstration, not a battle, to the death. Slowly, both warriors stepped back, their weapons lowering as they regarded each other with newfound respect. Captain Aldrich reached up to touch the spot where Marcus's sword had pressed against his throat, a gesture that confirmed what everyone had witnessed, but few could believe. The rookie had scored a decisive hit on one of the kingdom's most elite warriors. The silence that followed was deafening. No one seemed to know how to react to what they had just seen. Students stood with mouths agape. Instructors shook their heads in disbelief, and even the other members of the Royal Guard struggled to process the implications of what had occurred. This was not supposed to be possible. Captain Aldrich was the first to break the silence. With deliberate ceremony, he removed his helmet and placed it under his arm, revealing a face marked by years of battle but lit now with genuine admiration. His steel-gray eyes met Marcus's brown ones, and slowly, respectfully, the legendary warrior inclined his head in acknowledgement of his opponent's skill. The gesture released the crowd from their stunned stupor. Cheers erupted from every corner of the training ground as students, instructors, and spectators celebrated what they had witnessed. Marcus stood at the center of it all, his father's crude sword still in his hand, looking as surprised as anyone by what had just happened. But even as the celebration swirled around him, Marcus's attention remained focused on Captain Aldrich. The young man understood that while he had technically scored the winning blow, the captain could have ended the fight at any point if he had been willing to risk serious injury to either of them. This was not truly a victory in the traditional sense, but rather a recognition of potential and skill that few possessed. Master Willem pushed through the crowd, his weathered face showing a mixture of pride and concern that only a teacher who truly cared about his student could display. He had seen Marcus's incredible performance, but he also understood the dangerous implications of what had just occurred. Word of this fight would spread throughout the kingdom, bringing attention that the young man might not be prepared to handle. Captain Aldrich raised his hand, and the crowd gradually quieted, eager to hear what the legendary warrior would say about this unprecedented event. His voice, when it came, was clear and strong, carrying the authority of his position but tempered with respect for what he had experienced. The captain's words would later be repeated in taverns and training halls throughout the kingdom. He spoke of natural talent that appeared perhaps once in a generation, of instinctive fighting ability that could not be taught but only discovered through trials like the one they had just witnessed. He acknowledged that while experience and training remained crucial, raw potential combined with the right circumstances could produce results that defied conventional wisdom. But Captain Aldrich also issued a warning, one that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. He spoke of the dangers that came with exceptional ability displayed too early, of the enemies that talent could create and the expectations that could crush a young warrior before he had time to properly develop his skills. Fame, he cautioned, was a double-edged sword that had destroyed more promising fighters than enemy blades ever had. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with excitement over what they had witnessed, Captain Aldrich approached Marcus privately. The conversation they had would remain between them, but those who observed from a distance could see the serious nature of their discussion. The captain spoke at length, gesturing occasionally while Marcus listened intently, asking few questions but clearly absorbing every word. The other members of the Royal Guard gathered around their captain and the young fighter, adding their own observations and advice. These men had seen combat in every corner of the kingdom and beyond, and their collective wisdom represented decades of experience in warfare and survival. That they were willing to share this knowledge with a 19-year-old rookie spoke volumes about the impression Marcus had made. As the afternoon wore on and the normal routine of the academy slowly resumed, whispers followed Marcus wherever he went. His fellow students looked at him with a mixture of awe and envy, uncertain how to relate to someone who had just accomplished what seemed impossible. Some approached him with congratulations and questions, while others kept their distance, perhaps intimidated by his sudden elevation in status. The instructors faced their own dilemma. Marcus was still technically a beginning student with less than a year of training, yet he had just demonstrated abilities that surpassed many of their advanced pupils. How does one teach someone who had just outfought a Royal Guard captain? What lessons could they possibly offer that would be worthy of such displayed talent? Master Willem found himself struggling with these very questions as he watched Marcus moving through the training yard. The old instructor had dedicated his life to developing young fighters, but he had never encountered a situation quite like this one. He knew that Marcus would need guidance more than ever in the days to come, but the nature of that guidance would have to be very different from what he had been providing. The news of the fight began to spread beyond the academy's walls. Even before the day was over, servants who had witnessed the spectacle carried tales to their employers, students wrote letters to their families, and the members of the Royal Guard themselves would report back to their superiors about what they had seen. By evening, half the kingdom would know about the rookie who had touched his sword to Captain Aldrich's throat. Marcus spent the evening in his family's small home, recounting the events of the day to his parents. His father, the blacksmith, examined the sword he had forged years earlier with new appreciation, marveling at how it had performed in the hands of his son. His mother worried about the attention this would bring, her maternal instincts warning her that such notoriety could be as dangerous as it was exciting. As night fell over the kingdom, Marcus lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every moment of the extraordinary fight. He understood that his life had changed forever in the space of those 12 minutes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new expectations and new dangers that he could barely imagine. But tonight, as he drifted toward sleep, Marcus allowed himself to feel pride in what he had accomplished. He had faced one of the kingdom's greatest warriors and proven that courage, determination, and natural ability could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would meet them with the same spirit that had carried him through this incredible day. The 8th minute of combat brought with it a shift that no one in the crowd could have predicted. Captain Aldrich, who had begun the fight treating this as a routine demonstration, now found himself genuinely engaged in a battle of skills. Sweat beaded on his forehead beneath his helmet, and his breathing had become noticeably heavier. This young blacksmith's son was pushing him harder than he had been pushed in years. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to be entering a zone that athletes and warriors sometimes describe but rarely achieve. His movements flowed like water, each strike and parry executed with an efficiency that belied his limited training. The crude sword in his hands no longer felt awkward or unbalanced. It had become an extension of his will, responding to his thoughts as naturally as his own limbs. The crowd had swollen to include nearly everyone in the academy. Word had spread beyond the training grounds, and people were abandoning their daily tasks to witness this unprecedented spectacle. Even the kitchen staff and stable hands had gathered at the edges of the circle, their eyes wide with amazement as they watched one of their own stand toe-to-toe with the kingdom's most elite warrior. Master Willem found himself torn between pride and terror as he watched his student's incredible performance. The old instructor had trained hundreds of young fighters over the decades, but he had never seen raw talent manifest itself quite like this. Marcus was not just holding his own, he was actually improving with each exchange, learning and adapting at a rate that seemed almost supernatural. The other members of the Royal Guard stood in stunned silence, their usual stoic demeanor cracking, as they witnessed their captain being challenged in ways they had thought impossible. These men had served alongside Aldrich for years, had seen him defeat enemies that other warriors wouldn't dare face, and yet here he was, locked in genuine combat with a teenager who had been training for less than a year. As the fight progressed, Marcus began to notice patterns in the captain's technique. Despite his incredible skill, Aldrich, like all fighters, had certain preferences and tendencies. He favored his right side slightly when launching combination attacks. He had a tell before executing his most powerful strikes, a barely perceptible shift in his stance that Marcus's heightened awareness began to pick up on. This realization marked another turning point in the battle. Marcus started to anticipate the captain's moves, not through conscious analysis but through an intuitive understanding that seemed to develop moment by moment. When Aldrich prepared to launch a devastating thrust, Marcus was already moving to counter it. When the captain tried to trap him in a corner, Marcus slipped away like smoke, flowing to a more advantageous position. Captain Aldrich felt a mixture of frustration and admiration building within his chest. This boy was doing something he had seen only a handful of times in his entire career, learning and evolving in real time during combat. It was a rare gift, possessed by natural-born warriors who were destined for greatness. But recognizing the talent didn't make dealing with it any easier. The crowd gasped as Marcus executed a particularly daring maneuver, ducking under a horizontal slash and spinning behind the captain to deliver a strike that would have landed if Aldrich hadn't twisted away at the last possible second. The move demonstrated not just speed and agility, but tactical awareness that should have taken years to develop. By the 10th minute, something unprecedented was happening. Captain Aldrich found himself being forced to use techniques he typically reserved for serious combat situations. This was no longer a demonstration or a test. It had become a real fight, with both participants pushed to their limits. The captain's initial plan to end the bout quickly and decisively had been completely abandoned in favor of simply trying to maintain his advantage. The academy's instructors watched in growing amazement as Marcus displayed skills they had never seen from him during regular training. It was as if the pressure of facing such a formidable opponent had unlocked abilities that had been dormant within him. His footwork, which had always been adequate, now flowed like a dancer's. His swordwork, previously solid but unremarkable, had taken on an elegance and precision that left observers struggling to believe their eyes. Marcus felt as though he was seeing the fight from outside his own body. Every movement seemed perfectly clear. Every possibility mapped out before him like a chess master seeing multiple moves ahead. He could sense the captain's fatigue beginning to mount, could feel the older warrior's frustration growing as the fight continued far longer than planned. The crowd began to sense that they might be witnessing something truly historic. Whispers spread through the assembled spectators about the possibility of the impossible. Could this rookie actually defeat a Royal Guard captain? The very thought seemed absurd, yet the evidence of their eyes was becoming harder to deny with each passing moment. Captain Aldrich made a crucial decision as the fight entered its 11th minute. He had been holding back, treating this as a training exercise rather than genuine combat. But Marcus's skill and determination had earned the young man the right to face his full abilities. With a barely audible grunt of effort, the captain shifted into the combat stance he used when his life was truly on the line. The change was immediately apparent to everyone watching. Captain Aldrich's movements became sharper, more decisive, more dangerous. His attacks carried the full weight of his experience and skill, no longer pulled or softened for the sake of a demonstration. This was the true fighting ability that had made him legendary throughout the kingdom. Marcus felt the shift like a physical blow. The captain's increased intensity was overwhelming, forcing him back on the defensive as a flurry of attacks came faster and harder than anything he had faced before. For a moment it seemed as though the inevitable conclusion to the fight had finally arrived. But instead of crumbling under the increased pressure, Marcus found yet another level within himself. The desperate situation triggered an even deeper state of focus, one where thought and action merged into pure instinct. He began to move with a fluidity that seemed to defy the laws of physics, his body responding to threats before his mind had fully processed them. The crowd fell into complete silence as they witnessed this extraordinary escalation. Both fighters were now operating at levels that pushed the boundaries of human capability, their skills honed to razor sharpness by the crucible of genuine combat. The clash of their swords rang out like music, each note telling the story of two warriors giving everything they had to the contest. Master Willem clutched his chest, his old heart struggling to cope with the intensity of what he was witnessing. This was no longer just a student demonstrating his abilities. This was a warrior being born in the heat of battle, forged by the pressure of facing an opponent who demanded nothing less than perfection. As the 12th minute approached, both fighters showed signs of the tremendous effort they were expending, but neither showed any sign of yielding, their determination matched only by their rapidly growing mutual respect. What had begun as a simple demonstration had transformed into something that would be spoken of in whispers and legends for generations to come. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a blade as Marcus and Captain Aldrich circled each other in the makeshift arena. The crowd had grown larger, word having spread throughout the academy about the unusual matchup taking place. Even some of the instructors had stopped their own classes to witness what many expected would be the quickest defeat of the day. Marcus tried to calm his racing heart as he studied his opponent. Captain Aldrich moved with the fluid grace of a seasoned predator, his every step calculated and purposeful. The way he held his sword suggested decades of experience, and the small scars visible on his arms told stories of countless battles survived. In contrast, Marcus felt like a lamb walking into a lion's den. But as the seconds ticked by, something unexpected began to happen. Instead of the overwhelming fear he had anticipated, Marcus felt a strange sense of clarity washing over him. All the months of training, all the hours of practice, all the techniques Master Willem had drilled into him seemed to crystallize in his mind. His breathing steadied, and his grip on his father's sword became more confident. Captain Aldrich made the first move, a lightning-fast thrust aimed at Marcus's chest. It was a testing strike, designed to gauge the young man's reflexes and defensive capabilities. Most novices would have panicked and stumbled backward, creating an opening for a follow-up attack. But Marcus surprised everyone, including himself, by smoothly sidestepping the thrust and bringing his sword up in a perfect defensive position. The captain's eyebrows rose slightly, the first sign of genuine interest he had shown all day. The boy's reaction time was impressive, and his form, while rough around the edges, showed solid fundamentals. Aldrich pressed his attack, launching a series of measured strikes designed to test different aspects of Marcus's skill. Each attack came faster than the last, but Marcus found himself responding instinctively. His body moved without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over as he parried, dodged, and countered. The crude sword his father had forged felt perfectly balanced in his hands, as if it had been waiting for this moment to prove its worth. Alongside its wielder, the crowd began to murmur in amazement. What was supposed to be a quick demonstration of the Royal Guard's superiority had turned into something far more interesting. Marcus wasn't just surviving the captain's assault, he was actually holding his own. His footwork, learned through countless hours of practice on the Academy's dusty grounds, kept him just out of reach of the most dangerous strikes while positioning him to respond effectively. Captain Aldrich increased the intensity of his attacks, but Marcus seemed to rise to meet each new challenge. When the captain tried to overwhelm him with rapid combinations, Marcus used his youth and agility to stay mobile, refusing to be pinned down in one position. When the captain attempted to use his superior strength to batter through Marcus's defenses, the young man proved surprisingly resilient, absorbing the impact and redirecting the force rather than meeting it head-on. As the fight continued, something remarkable began to happen in the crowd. The initial laughter and whispered jokes had given way to genuine excitement and disbelief. Students who had dismissed Marcus as a foolish upstart were now cheering him on, caught up in the spectacle of seeing one of their own holding his ground against a legend. Master Willem watched from the sidelines with a mixture of pride and concern. He had always known Marcus possessed exceptional natural talent, but seeing it displayed against such a formidable opponent was both thrilling and terrifying. The old instructor found himself holding his breath with each exchange, silently praying that his student wouldn't get seriously injured in his moment of glory. The fight had been going on for nearly 5 minutes, far longer than anyone had expected. Most of the previous challengers had been defeated within the first minute, yet Marcus continued to dance around the captain's strikes with increasing confidence. His initial nervousness had completely evaporated, replaced by a focused determination that impressed even the other members of the Royal Guard. Captain Aldrich found himself genuinely puzzled by what he was witnessing. In his 15 years of service, he had faced countless opponents, from seasoned veterans to promising recruits. But he had never encountered someone who improved so dramatically in the middle of a fight. Marcus seemed to be learning and adapting, with each exchange his movements becoming more refined and his timing more precise as the battle progressed. The turning point came when Captain Aldrich decided to test the young man with one of his signature techniques. It was a complex combination attack that had never failed to overwhelm an opponent, involving a series of feints followed by a devastating overhead strike. He had used this technique to defeat knights with decades of experience, and he expected it to finally end this surprisingly entertaining bout. Marcus saw the attack coming and made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to block or dodge the powerful overhead strike, he did something completely unexpected. He stepped forward into the attack, angling his body so that the captain's sword whistled harmlessly past his shoulder, while simultaneously bringing his own blade up in a perfectly timed counterattack. The move was so unexpected and executed with such precision that Captain Aldrich barely managed to avoid being struck. For the first time in the fight, the legendary warrior found himself off balance and vulnerable. Marcus pressed his momentary advantage, launching into an aggressive combination that forced the captain to give ground. The crowd erupted in amazement. Not only was the rookie still standing after nearly 6 minutes of combat with a royal guard, but he had actually managed to put the captain on the defensive. Some spectators rubbed their eyes, certain they must be hallucinating. Others began to chant Marcus's name, swept up in the excitement of witnessing what appeared to be the impossible. But Captain Aldrich was far from defeated. The moment of vulnerability had been brief, and his years of experience quickly reasserted themselves. He regained his balance and began to methodically dismantle Marcus's offensive, using his superior technique and experience to gradually regain control of the fight. Yet, something had fundamentally changed in those few seconds when Marcus had seized the initiative. The young man's confidence had grown immeasurably, and he no longer fought like someone who expected to lose. His attacks became bolder, his movements more fluid, and his timing more precise. He was still clearly outmatched, but he was no longer simply surviving. He was actually fighting. As the battle entered its 7th minute, both fighters began to show signs of fatigue. Captain Aldrich, despite his excellent conditioning, was not accustomed to fights lasting this long during demonstrations. His armor, while providing excellent protection, was beginning to feel heavier with each passing moment. Meanwhile, Marcus's lighter gear allowed him to maintain his mobility, though his muscles were beginning to burn from the sustained effort. The other members of the Royal Guard watched in fascination as their captain was forced to work harder than he had in months. This was no longer a simple demonstration of superior skill. It had become a genuine test of both warriors' abilities. The outcome might still be predictable, but the journey to reach it had become far more interesting than anyone had anticipated. As the fight continued, whispers began to spread through the crowd about what they were witnessing. Some spoke of natural talent finally finding its moment to shine. Others wondered if they were seeing the birth of a future legend. All of them knew they were watching something special, something that would be talked about for years to come in the halls of the academy. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty training ground as Marcus wiped sweat from his brow. At 19 years old, he had been training at the local fighting academy for only 8 months, but his determination burned brighter than most veterans. His calloused hands gripped the wooden practice sword, and his muscles ached from the endless hours of drilling basic forms and footwork. The other trainees often whispered about Marcus behind his back. He came from the poorest district of the kingdom, where his father worked as a blacksmith and his mother took in washing to make ends meet. Unlike the wealthy noble's sons who trained alongside him, Marcus wore patched clothing and carried a sword his father had forged from scrap metal. But what he lacked in resources, he made up for in raw talent and an unbreakable spirit. Master Willem, the gruff old instructor who ran the academy, had noticed something special in the young man. While other students relied on expensive equipment and private tutors, Marcus studied every movement, memorized every technique, and practiced until his hands bled. He would arrive before dawn and stay long after the others had returned to their comfortable homes. On this particular morning, news spread through the academy like wildfire. The Royal Guard was coming to the kingdom for their annual demonstration and recruitment drive. These elite warriors served directly under the king and were considered the finest fighters in all the land. They would be selecting promising candidates to join their ranks, but only after testing their skills in combat. The announcement sent ripples of excitement and fear through the academy. The Royal Guard's standards were legendary. They had never recruited anyone under the age of 25, and most of their members came from noble families with generations of military service. The idea that a rookie like Marcus might even be considered seemed impossible to everyone, including Marcus himself. Captain Aldrich, the leader of the visiting Royal Guard unit, was a man whose reputation preceded him. Standing 6 feet tall with shoulders broad as an ox, he had served the crown for 15 years without a single defeat. His scarred hands told stories of countless battles, and his steel-gray eyes could pierce through a man's soul. When he walked, his armor gleamed like polished silver, and his presence commanded instant respect from everyone in the room. As the Royal Guard set up their demonstration area, Marcus watched from the sidelines with the other students. Captain Aldrich moved with a grace that seemed impossible for someone wearing full-plate armor. His sword work was poetry in motion, each strike precise and powerful. The way he handled his weapon made it look weightless, as if it were an extension of his own body. The demonstration began with Captain Aldrich facing 3 academy instructors simultaneously. The crowd gasped as he effortlessly parried their attacks, countering with moves so fast they were barely visible. Within minutes, all 3 instructors lay on the ground, defeated but unharmed. The captain had controlled every aspect of the fight, never once appearing to exert himself fully. When the demonstration ended, Captain Aldrich announced that any student who wished to test their skills against the Royal Guard could step forward. The challenge was open to all, but he warned that only those serious about joining the Guard should participate. The captain's eyes swept over the assembled students, most of whom suddenly found their shoes very interesting to look at. One by one, the academy's top students stepped forward. These were young men from wealthy families who had trained for years. under the best instructors money could buy. They wore expensive armor and carried swords worth more than most people earned in a year. Each was confident in their abilities and eager to prove themselves worthy of the royal guard. Marcus remained in the back of the crowd, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. He knew he was nowhere near the level of the elite students who were volunteering. His training was basic, his equipment was crude, and his experience was limited. Logic told him to stay quiet and watch from the sidelines. But something deeper than logic stirred within him. Ever since he was a child, listening to stories of brave knights and heroic warriors, Marcus had dreamed of serving something greater than himself. The Royal Guard represented everything he aspired to become: honor, courage, and the chance to protect innocent people from harm. As he watched the first volunteer face off against one of the Royal Guards, Marcus felt his resolve strengthening. The student, despite his expensive training and equipment, was quickly overwhelmed by the guard's superior skill and experience. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes before the young noble found himself flat on his back, staring up at the sky, in bewilderment. The second and third volunteers fared no better. Each was skilled in their own right, but none could match the precision and power of the Royal Guard. With each defeat, the crowd grew quieter, and fewer students seemed willing to step forward and face the inevitable humiliation of defeat. Captain Aldrich seemed pleased with the level of skill he had witnessed, even though none of the challengers had provided him with a real contest. He was about to conclude the demonstration when he noticed a young man slowly making his way forward from the back of the crowd. Marcus felt every eye in the training ground turn toward him as he stepped into the circle. His patched tunic and homemade sword looked even more shabby next to the grandeur of the Royal Guard's equipment. Several students snickered, and he heard someone whisper about the blacksmith's son getting above his station. But Marcus ignored the whispers and the stares. He approached Captain Aldrich with his head held high, his grip firm on his father's sword. When he stopped a respectful distance away and bowed properly, the captain studied him with those penetrating gray eyes. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Captain Aldrich had seen thousands of would-be warriors over the years, and something about this young man intrigued him. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence in his stance, or the way he held his weapon with natural familiarity despite its crude appearance. Whatever it was, the captain decided this rookie deserved the same chance as the others. Without a word, Captain Aldrich drew his sword and assumed a fighting stance. Marcus followed suit, his heart racing, but his hands steady. The crowd fell completely, silent, wondering what would happen when the kingdom's most elite warrior faced off against a 19-year-old blacksmith's son who had been training for less than a year.